r/NoSleep. Posted by Reddit user YungSeti. My best friend heard strange voices coming from a blizzard. He's been missing ever since. And I was beginning to feel the weight of the stress and the mental exhaustion from the events of the day taking effect, as sleep began to tug on the corners of my consciousness and pulled my mind adrift. I swiftly fell asleep. I was startled awake by the blare of my ringtone, a cold shock rippling through my body as I jolted awake. I cursed myself for the volume of my ringtone, which I never remembered to put down after taking my headphones out. I no longer felt that way, as the screen of my phone came to life. The final ring of the phone chimed through the air, gone before I could react, and I saw the time, 9:30. My heart froze as I saw the notifications. It fell entirely. 16 missed calls, 29 messages, 7 voicemails, all from the same person, Evan. Fuck, I spat, sitting upwards with such force it made me dizzy, as I grabbed my phone and immediately clicked Evan's call notifications. The phone rang and rang and rang, every second allowing agonizing anticipation to balloon larger, until I felt as though the sensation would make me burst. Come on, I begged into the line, as if my words would carry across the signal and answer for him. Finally, on what felt as though it had been the final ring, the call was answered. I waited for some response, but only heard silence from Evan's side. As I listened closer, I began to realize in the quiet, there was breathing. Evan? I called into the line, no longer making any attempt to conceal my panic. Evan's breathing grew louder. When he spoke, his voice was low and quivering, unrecognizable from the outwardly bold and brash attitude that was typical of him. He sounded scared for his life. They're everywhere, he rasped, desperation hanging on every word. They're all around the house, surrounding the house, all of them, out there in that fucking snow. His words chilled me to my core as I struggled to make sense of what he was saying. Evan attacked? The words came as my mind pieced together what was being said. I see them, Evan spoke with a raspiness in his voice that hadn't been present in the calls before. See who, Evan? Who's out there? My heartbeat was deafening in my own head as the images of masked men emerging from the snow, forcing their way into Evan's home armed with weapons and evil intent, filled my mind. They don't know it, but I can see them, all standing out there, standing in the snow. There's so many of them, Andrew. I swallowed, a strange new fear taking root as Evan's manic speech continued, and I began to wonder just what had happened while I'd slept, what had driven him to this state. I'd had enough and I needed answers. I needed to know what was going on. Evan, I need straight answers right now. Is someone breaking into your house? Do I need to call the police? I don't know what I expected to hear in response, but it certainly wasn't what I got. Evan laughed, cackled in a more appropriate term. It was short and harsh, but when he spoke, his voice was hollow and hopeless. The police? He said the words as though it was the first time he'd ever heard such a thing. You don't think I tried? I called them a half hour ago, and nothing. Not even a busy signal. I blinked, trying to process what he was telling me. He had tried to call the police. Just how bad had things gotten in my absence? Evan, I began, my voice strained with forced calmness. What happened? Evan's breathing slowed as he tried to calm himself and respond. When we got off the game, I went around the house turning on all the lights like I said I would. And for a while I just waited and listened. The entire house settled. The windows, the walls creaked against the storm, but other than that it was silent. The talking was gone. As Evan proceeded, the hairs on my back slowly began to rise, and I felt compelled to close my curtains. Continual barrage of white feeling as though it was closing in, pressing ever closer. He continued. I thought whoever was out there had left and I could just worry about this fucking blizzard, but they just wanted me to feel safe, to lower my guard. With every word Evan spoke, the deepening chasm of dread that had formed in me widened. My mouth felt dry, and my head pounded with fear for my friend's well-being. Evan rattled on, his delivery growing faster and less articulate by the second, manic excitement evident in his voice. They were everywhere, Andrew, banging on the doors, and the windows and the fucking roof, screaming and pleading and begging and promising and followed by low sobbing from his end. Something in me shattered as I heard my best friend begin to cry. His sobs were deep and hopeless. When he spoke, somehow, the loneliness rang out in his voice like a bell, hollow and cold. They want me to come outside, Andrew. They want me to join them in the snow. There are so many. So many. Can you hear them? Do not go out there, Evan, of what may await him on the outside of the storm. But every fiber in my well-being screamed for me to warn him, to plead for him to stay in the house. I heard a series of slamming noises, echoing from all around Evan, who muttered to himself inaudibly. Images sprang to my mind as I began to understand what I was hearing. Armies of figures moving through the snow, surrounding Evan's home, which stood with light pouring from its windows, like some strange lighthouse. In the vast white nothingness, droves of shadows spilled from the surrounding woods, under cover of darkness and concealed by snow, driving their fists into the windows and walls of the house. Evan, I called into the phone, raising my voice as sound around him seemed to grow their intensity and their violence. His response was almost impossible to hear above the surrounding clamor, and I had to strain myself to make out what he was saying. His voice was faint, just above a whisper. I heard something I hadn't heard from him all night. Some strange, delirium-fueled joy. It sounds nice out there. They all sound so happy. I could feel it. In those words, I knew that Evan was lost to me. Still, I refused to give up. Moisture sprang into my eyes as an impending sense of loss began to wash over me. I heard the sounds of a door opening, followed by the roar of the rushing wind. I knew what he was doing. I knew that I was too late, and whatever was out there had firmly planted hooks in Evan's mind. That my friend was already gone to me, lost to the blizzard, like the voices that called to him. I'm sorry, man, Evan spoke. The unnatural calm in his voice seemed alien against the cacophony sounds on his end. I have to go. Whatever surrounded his home began to cheer and whoop and holler as Evan brought himself closer and closer to the doorway, a captive and encouraging audience. I didn't know what else to say. I believe this is when he stepped out. The roar of the storm grew louder, ringing in my ears as if I'd stepped out into the blizzard myself. The cheers and cries of the otherworldly crowd disappeared with such sadness. I would have thought the call had ended, had it not been for the howling of the wind. Andrew! Fuck, why am I out here? Jesus, it's freaking freezing. He spoke again with a sudden fear and lucidity. My heart leaped at hearing Evan speak again, sounding like himself. Though confused and horrified at his current situation, I had no time to explain things to Evan, who seemed to have forgotten leaving the house, knowing that whatever had caused his strange behavior was still out there. "Get in the fucking house, Evan. There's something out there." "Jesus Christ, I see them," Evan spoke, his voice shaking with some fusion of awe and horror. "Evan, please go," with gritted teeth, filled with hopeless frustration. "I'm sorry, bud," Evan muttered, sounding resignated to his fate I refused to accept. "I think they're taking me now." Before I could speak, there was a sound, deafening even over the speakers of my phone, a mechanical echo reverberating from all around him. My head pounded. The strange sound, like some mechanized explosion, was gone, leaving silence in its wake. I don't know how long I sat there, dazed, hoping to hear Evan's voice break through the complete silence. As the seconds stretched into minutes, and the fleeting hope became a distant memory, I began to take notice of how quiet it was. I rushed to the window, pulling the curtains aside, reaffirming my realization. The storm had ended. With no more warning than it had arrived, powerful winds had returned to a frigid breeze, and the world, no longer concealed under the blizzard, lay eerily still and silent under a fresh coating of snow. I couldn't help but feel that the timing was all too specific. I called the police soon after. I told them the truth and fully prepared to be scrutinized, perhaps even accused of playing some role in Evan's disappearance. It was a strange, impossible story that I was reluctant to tell. I'll never forget the looks in the eyes of the officers who had arrived at my apartment to question me. They looked exhausted and afraid, and as I began to dive into the events of the night, the looks they exchanged between each other led me to believe that Evan's incident may not have been an isolated one. This isn't the first call we've gotten like that tonight. The shorter, slightly rounder officer started, pausing to cast a nervous glance over his shoulder. It's been a real weird night. A lot of interesting stories seem to blow in with the storm. People seeing lights in the sky, strange markings in the snow. He shivered, as a rogue breeze seemed to freeze the air. He appeared all too eager to return to the safety of his cruiser, and I couldn't blame him. I too was suddenly feeling very exposed. The taller of the two officers cleared his throat abruptly, shooting his partner a strange look before turning his attention back to me. We'll look into it," the larger of the two said, a scowl seemingly carved into his face. "In the meantime, I'd stay inside," he began, his eyes seeming to stare through me. "Strange weather. Best to be safe." I swallowed. The way he spoke made it clear that it wasn't the weather I should be worried about. The shorter officer bid me farewell, and the two were gone. I stood there a few moments longer, watching the cruiser disappear into the distance, leaving me alone. I stared out the silent snow-covered world around me for a few moments, my mind somewhere out by the nearby mountains, until my eyes drifted from the snowy peaks to the stars above. I stayed like that for a while, the events of earlier all replaying in my mind, until it had gotten too cold for me to remain out there any longer, and returned to my apartment. I no longer live in Colorado. In fact, I moved as far away from the snow as I could manage, transferring to a school in Texas. Still, when the nights get too quiet, and the air takes on just the right sort of chill, my ghosts return, and I can't help but wonder about it all. I spend many nights in bed, strange and impossible conclusions born of what little information I have. A constant series of discoveries and disputes in my own mind. Often, as my consciousness begins to fade, I can hear voices in my dreams, calling from wintry forests. Evans is the loudest among them all.